and China edge closer to a trade war. The Trump administration has just slapped a 25% tariff on billions of dollars of Chinese goods. China is already planning to retaliate. The president defended his decision.
We need protection. Everybody's taking advantage of us.
The U.S. warns the Syrian regime that there will be consequences for violating a de-escalation zone near Israel's border.
The Taliban leader who ordered the hit on Malala Yousafzai has reportedly been killed in a U.S. drone attack.
Today marks the end of the holy month of Ramadan. Millions of Muslims across the globe are celebrating with food and family.
From the I-24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Tal Heinrich.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crossroads. I'm Tal Heinrich, and Michael Schor is in for David tonight. Great to have you here, Michael.
Good to be back in New York.
We begin with the Trump administration moving forward with its plan to increase tariffs after all. The latest ones aimed at China.
25% tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese products, to be exact. Beijing has already responded with additional tariffs of its own. Correspondent Maggie Rulli has more.
The tit-for-tat over trade is escalating.
We're just announcing very big tariffs today on China.
President Trump revealing the 25% tariff of $50 billion worth of Chinese imports this morning on Fox News. The Chinese respond nearly immediately, fighting back with their own tariffs of, quote, equal strength. The Chinese Commerce Ministry statement isn't giving details, but a $50 billion list of possible targets announced in April included soybeans, orange juice, whiskey, and beef.
The impact will go far beyond just tariffs. We have to recognize that global supply chains are extremely complex, and any kind of tariff action which impacts the relationship between the U.S. and China will also disrupt global supply chains.
The president says the tariffs will, in part, help protect American intellectual property. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer agrees, tweeting his support and saying China is our real trade enemy. Today's tariffs are certainly less controversial than those announced earlier this month.
We need protection. Everybody's taking advantage of us.
Ruffling some feathers with steep tariffs on aluminum and steel imposed on some of our closest allies, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. All three of those countries have also promised a swift and severe backlash.
That was Maggie Rulli reporting, and in the middle of all of this, China carried out missile drills in the South China Sea.
That's right. China's Navy used 3 target drones making flyovers of a ship formation at varying heights. The area has been a source of great contention between the U.S. and China, with the U.S. accusing China of militarizing what Washington says should be an international and open waterway.
And to discuss all this further, let's bring in John Siddeley, geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors. John, great to have you here. Let's start with the tariffs. Can we officially say we are in a trade war with China? And is the U.S. the one to shoot the first shot?
When the Dow Jones Industrial Index drops 1 or 2%, it's the beginning of a trade war. When it drops 34/100ths%, it's a trade kerfuffle. So this is really just the beginning of what's going to be a long, drawn-out negotiating process between the U.S. and China. I don't see this as having a major impact right now, except from the rhetorical perspective. It's putting a lot of companies and governments on notice, but this is going to be a drawn-out process. It'll take quite some time, but it will, I think, bring repeated bouts of brinksmanship between the U.S. and China in the weeks and months to come.
So, John, if this is, let's say, we'll go with you, call it a trade kerfuffle, just because I wanted to say kerfuffle. If that's what this is, what is the end game for either? Who blinks generally when these things happen?
Well, I think it's important to go to the second part of Tal's question, and that is who started this. And right now you see a lot of the coverage focusing on the U.S. supposedly starting a trade war. But if we look at the facts, China began this trade war years, if not several decades ago. Its trade policy involves mandatory joint ventures, forced technology transfers of any companies that are doing business in China. And then the U.S. government has estimated that there's about $200 to $600 billion a year in losses to the American economy from intellectual property and technology theft by the Chinese government and Chinese companies every year. So the first shots have been fired by the Chinese for quite some time, and I think the Trump administration is determined to respond but it's not going to be pretty.
But it's a tit for tat game, right? Because it's not only, let's not talk only about China for a second. It's also with Mexico, with Canada, with the European Union. One imposes tariffs, the other responds. Could it be that it will eventually all balance down to zero tariffs, just hypothetically? What do you think?
Who knows? And I think what we see with President Trump right now is an extraordinarily high-risk strategy. I mean, really, he's declaring war on tariffs and subsidies and trade barriers around the world. And if you look at what we've seen over the last 20 years or so with what we call preferential trade agreements, you might call the EU one, where you have selective free trade, only for the members of the EU. You have NAFTA, free trade between the U.S., or not free trade, but freer trade, U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Even the Trans-Pacific Partnership, again, selective free trade, but excluding a number of countries. Now, President Trump is embarking on what may be a very high-risk strategy of universal free trade. That'll take a very long time to get to, and my guess is you're going to see significant resistance from many governments around the world that are determined to protect their own industries, probably including the United States, from Congress.
So you're talking about a high-risk strategy for the president, but it's also politically high-risk, is it not? I mean, there's a chance, Democrats are saying this anyway, that there's going to be job loss from these tariffs, and these job losses may even eclipse those that could have come through immigration and other detriments to this economy. So what's the truth behind that? Is it, in fact, a risky play for the president at home, too?
It is. Short-term, with the congressional elections. I mean, the Chinese are very savvy. So some of their first retaliatory tariffs are focusing on industrial products that affect Midwestern states that voted for Trump in 2016, as well as the farming sector. So they're looking to see where they can weaken that core support that Trump has enjoyed over the last year and a half. It could have an impact on the Republican congressional elections this year, and certainly on Trump's re-election prospects in 2020. So the Chinese are also looking to see how they play the Electoral College and the upcoming elections in 6 months or 5 months.
But the U.S. economy is doing well now. Maybe this gains the president some confidence despite all in-house opposition to these measures to impose them. But I want to ask you about the North Korea situation. Could China play this card? It's a relationship, it's influence on North Korea as part of this tariff game?
I believe that is very much part of this larger strategy. As important as trade is to President Trump, and he was very adamant about this and open during the presidential campaign, I think this is also part of a larger strategy in trying to make sure the Chinese are as cooperative in maintaining the very, very tight sanctions on North Korea. If we don't see movement on denuclearization in the next several months, the president has declared that there are 300 more sanctions he's got on hold right now against North Korea, and we're going to look to see how the Chinese work on imposing those as well. And keep in mind, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been in China over the last day and a half following the Trump-Kim Jong-un summit, working on trade issues and North Korea and, of course, the South China Sea.
It puts him in a very precarious position, having to sell these tariffs, or having to sell peace with these tariffs hanging over him in China, I would imagine, right?
They're all very much connected.
Yeah. So quick prediction. We'll gamble on this because that's what I like doing. How long will this tariff kerfuffle go on?
I don't know how long it's going to go on. That's a very dangerous prediction. I could short the markets on that one. But I will say that I think in the end, because the Chinese economy is more dependent on exports to the United States than we are on exports to China, I think in the end, China will find a way to bring this to a close, but in a face-saving way. That's going to be very important for a nationalist government in China.
John Siddeley, you're not going anywhere. You're sticking around with us because there's a lot more we want to discuss with you. Coming up on Crossroads, the Israeli army has struck Hamas targets in Gaza after the terrorist group threatened to launch thousands of flaming kites into Israel.
Plus, the U.S. warning Syria's President Bashar al-Assad against any more military moves in the de-escalation zone along Israel's border.